Tyrion Lannister first heard the distant rumble of hoofbeats long before the dust clouds appeared on the horizon. He was perched atop a lone dune in the red-washed darkness outside V's Dothraki, sleepless, sober for once in his life, hands trembling on the horn of his saddle. Dawn threatened the eastern sky, a thin line of bruised purple that promised relentless heat to come. Somewhere below, the Dothraki Khalasar stirred, restless as wolves before the kill, warriors gathering with their araks and painted vests. Tyrion rubbed the reins between his fingers, remembering that once, not so long ago, he had been nothing more than a disfavored son in King's Landing, a curiosity for the court to mock or ignore. Now the entire Khalasar answered his call. Or, more properly, the calls of the new Khal he had helped rise to power. The smallest Lannister closed his eyes and let the wind whip over him, bringing the scent of horses, sweat, and the faint tang of distant steel. He had crossed the world and betrayed more than one ally to stand on this dune. If all went according to plan, today would mark the beginning of a conquest that would reshape Westeros, and an unlikely dwarf would stand at its head. He leaned forward and spurred his horse down the slope, finding it surreal that he rode amid a tide of braided warriors. He remembered the jokes back in King's Landing about him riding a pony. Those jokes belonged to another life. Now, the Dothraki parted for him, grudgingly, with sneers and suspicious eyes, but they parted all the same. Any man who questioned why they followed Tyrion Lannister did so under fear of the new Khal's wrath. Slowly, Tyrion made his way to the center of the encampment, where dozens of tall, chestnut mares were picketed and stamping at the earth. The men around them wore broad leather belts hung with knives and carried curved araks. The new Khal, Motho, stood in the middle of them like an iron statue. He was a giant of a man, with chest and arms so muscled that his painted vest seemed on the verge of bursting. Tyrion had seen him bash a lesser rider's head in with a single blow once. A gruesome memory, but necessary. Respect in this land was bathed in blood. Motho possessed the fierceness of Drogo, but also a cunning gleam in his eye, something Tyrion had recognized as a thread he could weave into a larger scheme. Motho turned at Tyrion's approach. His long braids, each carefully ornamented with silver bells, clinked softly. He regarded the dwarf with an air of amusement, as if still unable to believe he had joined forces with him. Tyrion offered a curt nod. Even though Motho respected him, Tyrion knew better than to assume the man's patience was inexhaustible. The Dothraki valued strength, boldness, and success. So far, Tyrion's counsel had brought them riches from the merchant lords of Essos and bent the knee of rival Khalasars. So long as Tyrion delivered victory in gold, he would remain valuable. If he did not, his head would surely be the next to crack under Motho's arak. He had no intention of failing. There was too much at stake, the throne of Westeros, the revenge he sought against his own family, though he hated to admit that a part of him still ached for them, for what they could have been. And perhaps a form of redemption in proving himself bigger than the mocking epithet of imp once he had laid claim to nothing more than fleeting respect from cunning men. Now he had Dothraki at his back, a savage host that would tear through any keep, any city, any castle. They were an unstoppable flood, so long as Tyrion guided them to the right cracks in Westeros's defenses. He turned to survey the camp. Thousands of warriors, strong and lithe, prepared their tack and stowed their meager belongings. The Dothraki moved fast. Tyrion had learned to travel light, leaving behind any semblance of the luxurious life he'd once known. His mouth felt like sandpaper, so he reached for the water skin at his belt, took a swig, spat some dust out. Then he whispered the first words of the day to Motho. "It is time," he said in low Valyrian, the common tongue Tyrion had taught Motho to speak well enough that they could converse. Motho grinned, revealing a mouth of crooked, white teeth. He thundered back a single phrase in his own language, and the horde around him erupted into a chant. Within moments, the camp buzzed like an angry hive. Horses were mounted, banners, rudimentary things, mostly animal hides or twisted braids, were lifted. Tyrion tapped his own horse's flank and forced it to follow, weaving through the mass of riders. They streamed out from the makeshift settlement in a pounding wave. Tyrion could feel the vibration rattling his bones, and a strange surge of exhilaration filled his chest. He might die in the next week or even the next hour, but for now he was at the forefront of history, shaping it to his whim. A single thought dominated his mind, crossing the sea to Westeros. It had not been a trivial matter to bring the Dothraki across the narrow sea. Ships and slavers needed to be bargained with, an entire network of bribes had been arranged in Pentos and Volantis, not to mention forging alliances with unscrupulous magisters who hated each other almost as much as they hated paying fees. But with Tyrion's talent for negotiation and a healthy injection of gold from Casterly Rock's secret coffers that Tyrion had redirected before his exile, he had done the impossible. The day that the Dothraki set foot on Westeros soil would be remembered in the annals of every house. He just needed it to happen quickly. Rumors of dragons were sweeping across Essos, whispers of Daenerys Targaryen having vanished again, or perhaps off forging her own alliances. If she re-emerged, Tyrion knew she might rally Dothraki to her side. He had to seize his advantage now while the realm was fractured by wars, petty alliances, and the madness of yet another king. He was uncertain who held the throne in King's Landing these days. Cersei might yet remain regent, or perhaps Tommen, if the boy king still breathed. Tyrion only knew this. The Lannister hold on power was tenuous. The Tyrells might have turned on them, the north was seething after the Red Wedding, and the Iron Islands were restless. It was the perfect moment for the foreign thunder to shatter the peace. It had been a twisted path that led Tyrion here, his time as Hand of the King, his humiliating trial for Joffrey's murder, his vengeance upon his father Tywin, and his subsequent flight across the sea. But along the way he discovered a taste for cunning and the gambler's thrill. If one was called a monster, might as well prove monstrous. If one was called cunning, might as well outfox every last lord. And so the deals were made. One day, perhaps he would have to answer for them, but that day was not this day. They rode until the sun was well above the horizon. The land outside V's Dothraki rolled into an expanse of dusty plains. Ahead, Tyrion spotted the massive outlines of the transport ships that had been arranged. They waited along the shallow bay. Scores of galleys and cogs, many bearing the insignia of a certain Pentoshi merchant lord who only a month earlier had sworn he would never do business with the Dothraki. A few threatened to revolt when they saw the wild horde approach, but gold changed minds quickly. Tyrion had learned from the best. The promise of profit and the fear of losing their heads would make even the most timid merchant hold steady. Tyrion's horse picked its way through the shallows. Sand gave way to gravel, and the smell of salt water replaced the desert dryness. Motho's stallion pranced at the front, the bells in the Khals' hair jingling ominously. From ship to ship, Tyrion had stationed hired sellswords who would maintain order during the crossing. An entire Dothraki khalasar aboard ships was a recipe for tension. The Dothraki hated the water, many believing demons haunted its depths. Indeed, fear quivered in some of the men's eyes. Yet the desire for plunder, conquest, and new horse-filled meadows overcame their superstitions. They would sail if it meant a new world of war to feast upon. Tyrion took a moment to survey the men loading the ships. He saw the glint of steel, the bared arms of men used to harsh sun, the carefully braiding of hair which for a Dothraki signaled how many battles they had won without tasting defeat. He tried to imagine the horror on the faces of Westerosi lords when these same warriors galloped through their fields. The vision almost made him smile. For too long he had been scorned in the Seven Kingdoms. Perhaps now they would learn to fear a Lannister name not for gold alone but for unstoppable savagery. And yet, under the surface of that dark thrill, Tyrion felt a knot of disquiet. There would be blood, and lots of it. Westeros was his home, no matter how cruelly it had treated him. He'd be unleashing an army of men who regarded rapine, looting, and wanton destruction as the spoils of war. He tried to frame it as poetic justice. After all, had the Lannisters not unleashed worse upon the Riverlands during the War of the Five Kings? Had House Frey not shown the realm what betrayal truly meant? Yet moral justifications felt like a thin salve for what was about to happen. The dire consequences, Tyrion told himself, would be overshadowed by the inevitable forging of a new order. He would shape that order. That was the key. Let them call him a traitor or a demon if they wished. Once he was in control, he could mold the realms to something better, or at least something new. Men shouted as Tyrion approached the largest ship in the harbor. He recognized one of the Pentoshi captains, a slender man with a wiry mustache and eyes that darted around as if expecting to be stabbed at any moment. The captain bowed too deeply when he caught sight of Tyrion, nearly dropping the ledger he carried. Tyrion forced courtesy. "Captain, my dear friend, I trust all is ready?" The man nodded in frantic agreement, words tumbling over themselves. "Yes, yes, my lord. We, my men, that is, we have prepared the decks as you requested. The horses will be in the lower hold, guarded, and we have rope lines for air." Tyrion raised a hand to silence him. Good, good. Make sure you keep the men calm. Remind them there's a fortune in gold waiting at the other side of the narrow sea. That will steady them if the sea gets rough." The man gulped and nodded again. "Of course, my lord." Tyrion glanced over his shoulder at Motho, who was beckoning impatiently. "I'll be aboard soon," Tyrion told the captain. "See to your tasks." With that, Tyrion guided his horse away, noting how the waves slapped the hull. The bay was calm enough for now, though storms were frequent this time of year. Let's see the fates allow this crossing. He let out a long exhale. This was it. No turning back. One by one, the Dothraki began leading their mounts onto the wooden ramps. The animals neighed, some refused. Whips snapped, men bellowed, and gradually horses and warriors filtered into the cogs. Tyrion dismounted and walked up the ramp, ignoring the stairs, ignoring the stench of sweat and horse manure. He found a place on the deck near Motho. The Khal wore a grim expression as he stared at the expanse of water. With one final deep breath, Tyrion summoned his courage and gave the signal to the captain. The anchors were pulled, sails unfurled, and the fleet set out into the pale waters. The crossing was a blend of tedium and tension. On the deck, Dothraki paced, uneasy on the rolling waves, peering suspiciously over the railings. Occasional disputes broke out among the warriors, but Tyrion's hired sellswords, equally well-paid and well-armed, kept them from tearing each other apart. At night, the only lights came from the moon and a few meager lanterns flickering against the endless black. Tyrion lay awake, listening to the soft thunder of waves against the hull, thinking of the day he had shot his father, the echo of that crossbow bolt. The nightmares still came. The ghost of Tywin Lannister seemed to mock him. "You fool. You can never rule. You were less than the dirt beneath my boots." But Tyrion smiled into the darkness, remembering the moment of release when that final bolt took the old lion's life. Yes, perhaps he was a fool. But he was a fool who commanded thousands of bloodthirsty Dothraki. And he was sailing back to the land of his birth, ready to tear it apart and reshape it in his own image. Days passed, the crossing made with minimal casualties, mostly from seasickness or ill-timed brawls. At last, Westeros loomed into sight. The first faint outline of a coastline graced the horizon at dawn. Tyrion felt his breath catch. The last time he had looked upon that coast, he had been a prisoner in a crate or else flitting in the shadows, half a step from the headsman's axe. Now he returned not as a fugitive, but as a conqueror. He gazed at Motho, who wore an eager grin. The Dothraki had grown impatient on the ships. Their hunger for war was almost tangible. Soon, they would have all the war they desired and more. Docking was the next challenge. The fleet anchored near a stretch of shoreline south of the Vale where the land was rocky and scattered with meager fishing villages. It was not the grandest landing, but Tyrion had chosen it deliberately. The Vale's armies were formidable, but the mountainous roads were narrow and ill-suited for cavalry. He intended to keep the bulk of the Dothraki hidden and then push inward to sow chaos among the lesser lords before any grand alliance could form. Besides, he knew the Vale might be in turmoil after Littlefinger's manipulations. Allies could be bought. The fishers who spotted the enormous fleet of foreign ships must have trembled in their huts, suspecting only ill omens. Tyrion was certain news would travel quickly to whatever local lord held sway here, but it would not matter. Within hours, the Dothraki would swarm the region. By the time ravens took flight to the Eyrie or King's Landing, the invasion would be unstoppable. Motho was the first to disembark, whooping as his horse's hoofs sank into the sand. Dothraki poured off the ships with reckless abandon. Tyrion followed more slowly, mindful of every step. The air smelled of salt and pine, and the familiarity of Westeros struck him like a physical blow. Above, gulls circled, screeching. The men, dozens at first, hundreds within minutes, began to array themselves along the beach, checking tack and weapons. When the entire Khalasar had gathered, Tyrion felt the magnitude of it deep in his gut. So many warriors, all of them sporting braids, scars, savage eyes. Banners fluttered in the morning breeze. The sellswords formed a loose perimeter, though Tyrion doubted they'd be necessary. Few fisherfolk would dare stand in the way. He rode forward through the mass. Motho sat tall on his stallion, scanning the distant hills, as if to gauge how quickly his horde could race into them. The Khal turned to Tyrion and barked a question in Dothraki, something about which direction to ride. Tyrion answered in the same tongue as best he could. His accent was flawed, but Motho understood. They would first capture the nearest fort or village, take what they needed. Let the realm know the Dothraki had arrived. Tyrion reflected that it was a horrifying plan if you lived in that village. In the recesses of his mind, he felt a surge of guilt. Innocent folk, humble people, soon to be caught in the torrent. Yet he steeled his resolve. War was war. There was no more turning back. And so they set forth. The riders scattered over the fields, whooping and brandishing their blades. Tyrion couldn't help but see how easily they took to this new land. Any farmland or meadow was a paradise for the Dothraki. The hills and forests might pose a challenge, but the open spaces were enough to let them gallop and raid. Within an hour, they found the first hamlet, a few modest huts near a small orchard. The fisherfolk there scattered. Some tried to hide, Others simply ran as soon as they heard the thunder of hooves. The Dothraki set to plundering, rummaging for anything of value. The hamlet's handful of men put up a token resistance, brandishing fishing spears. It ended swiftly. Tyrion watched from a slight rise, forcing himself to remain impassive. Within minutes, huts burned, men were cut down, and Motho's riders crowed their victory. A worthless victory. In truth, the hamlet had little wealth. But the Dothraki exulted in the kill, for it announced their arrival in this new world. Tyrion disapproved of needless slaughter, but restraining the entire Khalasar was impossible. They were the hammer, and Westeros would be the anvil. Once the hamlet was taken, they moved further inland, driving small herds of newly acquired livestock and carrying crates of food. Tyrion watched the black plumes of smoke rise, a beacon that would herald the invaders' presence. Motho posted scouts on the high ridges to watch for approaching forces. Tyrion hoped the local lords would be slow to respond. Perhaps they would band together at the Eyrie, or else attempt to rouse the Knights of the Vale. But the Vale had lost so many men in the War of the Five Kings, and its leadership was uncertain. As night fell, the Dothraki made camp around the burning wreck of the hamlet. Tyrion found a quiet corner. He sat on a rock, swirling a cup of thin ale, trying to keep his mind on the next steps. He needed to see if any local minor lord could be bribed into giving them safe passage through certain passes. But that might not be feasible. The Dothraki would prefer to storm in swords first. He stared at the flames dancing on the huts, remembering a time he had lit a fortress's wildfire caches. He still felt the heat on his face, still smelled the stench of scorched flesh. A part of him did not want to witness such devastation again. But it was happening. He was the orchestrator. He consoled himself with the thought that once they established a foothold, he could set rules. He might curb the violence. He might do what Daenerys once tried, harness the Dothraki's ferocity but keep it somewhat controlled. The memory of Daenerys reminded him of how tenuous that plan could be. Even the mother of dragons had struggled to contain the savage impulses of her followers. Tyrion was no dragon queen. He was only a dwarf with a silver tongue. But that silver tongue had seen him this far. Let it see him further. By morning, scouts returned with word that a small garrison fortress lay a day's ride to the west, perched near a winding road that led deeper into the Vale. Tyrion knew of no major seat in that exact area, so likely it was a lesser hold. The Dothraki set out immediately, thirsting for fresh conquest. Tyrion traveled with them, feeling half-sick at the thought. He remembered how many times he had studied maps, memorizing strongholds and roads. He had done so to help defend King's Landing once, ironically. Now he used that knowledge to betray it. They came upon the fortress at noon, the sun blazing overhead. It was perched atop a modest hill, ringed by a wooden palisade. The banner flying above the gate seemed to depict a pair of crossed falcon wings. Tyrion didn't recognize the sigil. Likely a minor branch of one of the Vale's old families. The fortress had watchtowers, and soon the alarm bells rang. Motho's outriders galloped around the perimeter. Tyrion observed a handful of defenders scurrying atop the walls, perhaps 100 men at most. Not enough to hold off thousands of Dothraki. The gates were barred, but the Dothraki laughed at wooden gates. Tyrion took a position behind the main host, watching the war chiefs gather. The next moment, horns blared, and the Dothraki charged the gate. Yes, in a sweeping formation. Arrows flew from the towers, cutting down a few of the riders, but not nearly enough. The main gate splintered under the assault of a massive battering ram. The defenders tried to pour hot sand and oil, but the Dothraki parted and reformed with uncanny speed, striking from multiple angles. Within minutes, the palisade was breached. As the gates thundered open, Tyrion glimpsed the first wave of savage riders flooding inside, hacking at anything that moved. He heard screaming, women, men, children perhaps. The clash of steel was accompanied by the guttural roars of the Dothraki. Tyrion closed his eyes for a moment, remembering he was the one who unleashed this upon Westeros. Then, with a snarl of resignation, he pushed his horse forward. He had to make an appearance. If he hid, Motho might think him weak. And if he was weak, he would lose control. Even so, he carried no illusions that he could stop the carnage. The time for moral hesitations had passed. Inside the walls, chaos reigned. The defenders had formed a small shield wall near the central courtyard, but the Dothraki circled them like wolves. On the battlements, a few archers pelted the riders with arrows, but soon sellswords hired by Tyrion reached them and subdued them. Tyrion weaved his way through the carnage, ducking a wild slash here or there as frightened men lashed out. If he didn't watch himself, he might become an accidental casualty. He spotted Motho dismounting near what looked like the keep's great hall. The Khal approached the door with savage glee, kicked it in, and vanished inside with a handful of his elite warriors. A chorus of screams erupted shortly thereafter. Tyrion tried not to dwell on what might be happening. Instead, he urged his horse onward, searching for the fortress's lord or any official who might be willing to yield. Perhaps if he found them soon, fewer innocents would die. Rounding a corner, he stumbled upon a group of terrified stable hands huddled behind a trough. They raised pitchforks in trembling hands as Tyrion approached. The dwarf raised his own hands in what he hoped was a calming gesture. "Easy, friends," he said in the common tongue. "I'm not here to kill you. Run if you value your lives, or surrender if you prefer. My men won't chase stable hands. Tell them Tyrion Lannister has granted you mercy." The words felt hollow in his mouth, but they were all he could offer. The men, wide-eyed, nodded frantically and ran, scattering into the stables. Tyrion watched them vanish, hoping they found some route of escape. Moments later, he spied a figure in partial armor staggering from the keep, bleeding from a slash across his shoulder. The man tottered toward Tyrion, raising a longsword as if to challenge him. Tyrion recognized the man's bearing, likely a knight or minor lord. Another wave of riders dashed forward, but Tyrion shouted for them to hold. He switched to Dothraki and demanded they leave the man to him. The riders paused, uncertain, but Motho had ordered them not to harm the dwarf's playthings. So they backed away, sneering. The wounded knight glared at Tyrion, trying to keep the sword steady. "You a Lannister? What is this?" Tyrion rode closer, staying just out of range. "Lord, whoever you are. I'm Tyrion of House Lannister, indeed. I apologize for the intrusion, but we require your fortress. If you yield, your people might be spared." He glanced around at the carnage. "Or at least some of them might be. Don't be a fool." The knight spat blood. "You've brought the Dothraki," he coughed, "to our shores, you demon." He stumbled, clutching his wound. Tyrion's expression hardened. "Demon? I've been called worse. But demon or no, you have no hope of standing against us. Surrender." The knight's eyes darted around. He saw the swirling chaos. Dothraki stripped the fortress of its valuables. The defenders were scattered or dead. Even the women and children huddled in corners, terror on their faces. At last, the knight let the sword slip from his grip. He fell to his knees, tears in his eyes. Tyrion dismounted and moved closer. In a quiet voice, he said, "Tell me your name." "Ser Wendell Belmore," the man gasped. Tyrion recognized the family name vaguely. A minor branch of House Belmore, sworn to the Eyrie. "Very well, Ser Wendell. I accept your surrender, such as it is. I advise you to keep your men from further resistance. I can't stop all the bloodshed, but I'll do what I can. Warn them to yield." Ser Wendell, tears streaming, nodded. "Yes. Yes." Tyrion gestured for a pair of sellswords to take the man into custody. Then he strode through the keep's threshold, stepping over bodies. The stench was overwhelming. Motho stood in the center of the hall, chest heaving, his arak dripping red. A few Dothraki rummaged through the place, smashing crates, ripping down banners. Motho turned at Tyrion's entrance, a savage grin splitting his face. He spoke in the common tongue, which Tyrion had taught him rudimentarily. "The fortress is ours. Many cowards have died." Tyrion forced a thin smile. "Well done, mighty Khal. You have taken your first castle in Westeros." Motho lifted his chin proudly, surveying the scattered bodies. "It is small," he said, "like a child's fort. We will take bigger ones next." Tyrion nodded, stepping over the remains of a man in battered armor. "Yes, we will. But first, we must consolidate our hold on this region." He turned to address the Dothraki around them, raising his voice. "We'll make this fortress our staging ground. There's no need to burn it. Keep it. We can store supplies here, rest our horses, and plan." The men listened, though Tyrion sensed their lust for more immediate plunder. He clapped his hands. "You'll have it soon enough. First, gather the spoils. Then we move on." Through the remainder of the day, the fortress was stripped of arms, armor, and anything else of value. The surviving defenders, perhaps a handful, were given a choice, serve or die. Some chose death, but most, faced with the unstoppable wave of savage warriors, grudgingly bent the knee. Tyrion felt no joy in it, but it was necessary. By evening, Motho had posted watchers along the perimeter. Tyrion took a seat in the courtyard near a makeshift fire. He surveyed the battered fortress walls, hearing the groans of the wounded. War had found Westeros again. He sipped watered wine, trying to bury the pang of guilt and pity in his chest. 3 nights passed, and in that time, the Dothraki raided a few nearby villages, rounding up livestock and capturing more thralls. The news must be spreading like wildfire across the Vale. Tyrion knew it was only a matter of time before some local lord with an army tried to challenge them. But with thousands of riders, the advantage was theirs. The scattered forces of the Vale could not match the Dothraki in open battle. Perhaps the area itself might hold out, but the roads leading there were narrow. Tyrion felt confident they could bypass the fortress in the sky or starve it out if needed. The next step, though, was to spread the chaos more widely so that the rest of Westeros would be paralyzed. He gave orders to dispatch smaller Khalasars in various directions, each led by a loyal war chief. They would strike the roads near the neck, the outskirts of the riverlands and the crownlands. Let them burn crops, raid caravans, sow terror. The realm would see the Dothraki threat rising from the Vale, unstoppable as a storm. In the meantime, Tyrion intended to gather intelligence on King's Landing. He needed to know who sat the throne, who commanded the Lannister armies now that Tywin was gone. He wondered if Jaime still lived, if Cersei was still imprisoned by her own schemes, or if Tommen wore a crown. He did not yet know how he would handle them. Part of him wanted revenge. Another part remembered that Jaime had once shown him kindness. But the unstoppable wheel of war would soon crush any illusions of brotherly affection. One evening, as Tyrion mulled these thoughts alone in the keep's highest tower, a Dothraki warrior called Kotho approached. He spoke haltingly in low Valyrian, telling Tyrion that scouts had sighted an approaching force to the west, perhaps 500 men. Tyrion grunted and stood, stretching his stiff limbs. A small force, probably a local lord's retinue. The perfect opportunity to display the might of the Dothraki. Tyrion followed Kotho down to the courtyard, where Motho was already assembling a contingent of riders. Tyrion mounted up, and they rode out under the moonlight, swiftly covering the miles to intercept the foe. They found them near a winding river. It was indeed about 500 men, wearing the sigil of House Royce, or so it seemed, with a sprinkling of other local banners. Tyrion suspected they were a hastily assembled host, hoping to surprise the invaders. Unfortunately for them, the Dothraki were expert at surprise. Motho deployed his outriders in a wide arc, cutting off escape routes. Tyrion positioned himself atop a small hill from where he could watch the entire field by the pale moonlight. When the riders attacked, the Vale men panicked. The Dothraki shrieked war cries, hooves thundered, and rocks flashed silver. The defenders tried to form ranks, but the swirling cavalry quickly outflanked them. Within moments, it was a slaughter. Some of the Vale Knights fought bravely, but they were hopelessly outnumbered and unprepared for the speed and ferocity of the Horse Lords. Tyrion watched from his vantage, feeling no thrill. He was numb to it now, resigned. This was how the Dothraki waged war. When it was done, a handful of prisoners were dragged before Motho. The call turned to Tyrion, expecting him to question them. Tyrion dismounted and stepped among the captured men, who knelt in the dirt. One was a grizzled knight, helmet lost, face spattered with blood. "Name," Tyrion said quietly. The man spat. "I am Ser Bartimus Royce." He glowered at the savage warriors around him. "I answer only to Lady Sansa of Winterfell and Lord Yohn Royce of the Vale." Tyrion raised an eyebrow at the mention of Lady Sansa. So she was allied with the Royces now, leading in the Vale perhaps. Lady Sansa. So the rumors were true. The last known Stark girl. Interesting. He pursed his lips. Sansa had once been betrothed to Joffrey and later forced into marriage with Tyrion himself, an arrangement that had never been consummated. Has the Vale pledged itself to the Starks, then? He asked. Ser Bartimus clenched his jaw. Lady Sansa is betrothed to Harold Harding, I hear. She commands respect among many houses. She will not let you defile the Vale? Tyrion couldn't help but feel a pang in his chest at the mention of Sansa. She had been a frightened girl last he saw her, though she was blossoming into a cunning lady by the time she escaped King's Landing. Could she have seized power in the Vale? If so, she might be a formidable adversary. She was a Stark after all, and the Vale might rally behind her once the truth of her heritage was widely accepted. He studied Ser Bartimus. The man's defiance was admirable but useless in the face of the Dothraki hordes. Tyrion sighed. Tell your lady and Lord Royce and any who will listen that the Dothraki have come. If she values her people, she should treat with me. I'll not indulge in meaningless butchery if we can arrange terms. That was half a lie, of course. The Dothraki needed blood and plunder to satisfy their thirst, but Tyrion preferred to think he could bargain for more controlled devastations. Ser Bartimaeus sneered. "We will never bend to savages." Tyrion glanced at Motho. The Khal seemed impatient. "Very well," Tyrion murmured. "Then you'll die." He hated how cold his own voice sounded, but the man had refused any chance of parley. Perhaps the Dothraki's reputation alone had made negotiation impossible. Tyrion said a quick, silent apology in his mind. Then he gave the signal. Motho's men hauled the prisoners aside. The screams that followed were over quickly. That night, Tyrion found sleep impossible. He drank more than he should, but the wine did nothing to quell the roiling in his gut. The mention of Sansa Stark was a thorn. Once upon a time, he had tried to protect her from Joffrey's cruelty. Now, ironically, he was the one unleashing cruelty on the land she inhabited. The thought made him squirm. But if she truly had the Vale's loyalty, might she be open to negotiation? She had no reason to love House Lannister. Yet perhaps she knew Tyrion was not the same as the rest of them. He wondered if that would matter now. The lines were drawn in blood, and he was standing on the side of an invading horde. In the days that followed, the Dothraki advanced deeper into the Vale, raising small holdfasts, capturing horses, and spreading fear like wildfire. Some lords retreated to the safety of the mountains while others tried to muster armies. Tyrion orchestrated the chaos carefully, sending Motho's outriders to block supply lines and cut off communication. He wanted the Vale's defenders scattered and panicked before they could mount a serious counterattack. Any time a group of knights formed, they were ambushed by swift riders. He also dispatched envoys under guard to various lesser lords, offering them a chance to bend the knee and keep their lands. A few accepted, cowering in fear of the Dothraki. Others refused and paid the price in blood. Whispers reached Tyrion about Lady Sansa traveling from the Eyrie, trying to rally the Vale lords. He expected a confrontation soon. Even from behind the lines, Tyrion kept the bigger picture in mind. The rest of Westeros would be hearing of the invasion. The Lannisters, the Tyrells, the Martells, what was left of them, everyone would be scrambling to respond. Would they unite? Unlikely, given the realm's fractured state. The North might remain preoccupied with its own troubles, the Riverlands with the frays. King's Landing's occupant, whoever that was, would try to muster the Crownlands. If Tyrion kept them off balance, they would never form a cohesive response until it was too late. Another fortress fell, adding to the tally of conquests. Tyrion began to gather spoils and funnel them back to the beachhead fortress, which he had decided to rename Horse's Reach in a tongue-in-cheek nod. He ordered Mont Ambali improvements, urged the Dothraki to fortify it. The idea of Dothraki building fortifications was laughable, but in time they understood Tyrion's logic. A secure foothold offered a place to store gold, slaves, and supplies. Motho complied grudgingly. The Khal cared little for walls, but if Tyrion said it helped them wage war, so be it. Eventually, word arrived that a larger host was gathering near a place called the Seven Gate Crossroads, a confluence of roads that served as a major route into the heart of the Vale. Tyrion expected Sansa or one of her bannermen might be there, trying to form a defensive line. He relayed the intelligence to Motho. The Khal's eyes gleamed at the prospect of a grander battle. They set out immediately with thousands of riders. Tyrion accompanied them, bracing himself for a decisive clash that might break the Vale's back once and for all. They rode day and night, crossing streams, scaling gentle slopes, always on the move. The land was more rugged here, with more trees and rocky outcrops. Not the ideal terrain for the Dothraki, but still workable. Their outriders scouted ahead, confirming that a sizable force held the crossroads. On the eve of battle, Tyrion and Motho stood on a vantage point overlooking the plain. Torches flickered in the enemy camp. Tyrion estimated at least 3,000 or 4,000 men, possibly more. The numbers were close, though the Dothraki might still have the advantage. If the enemy had heavy cavalry, that might complicate matters, but the Vale was not known for large numbers of mounted knights. They were known for skilled infantry, archers, and a fortress perched among the clouds. Tyrion crouched low, peering at the lights below. He heard the steady breath of Motho at his side. The Khal wore a fierce grin. "We killed them all," Motho whispered in broken common tongue. Tyrion's stomach clenched. This was not going to be a skirmish. This would be a pitched battle that could decide the fate of the Vale. The memory of Sansa's face floated before him, reminding him that she might be there. Would she risk the front lines, or remain at the Eyrie? Could Tyrion find a way to broker a truce with her specifically? He wasn't sure. War had its own momentum. He had unleashed it. Now it carried them forward like a raging tide. At dawn, horns sounded across the plain. The Dothraki swarmed down from the ridges, shattering the morning stillness with their war cries. The Vale Lords responded with drums and shouted commands, forming their ranks. Tyrion positioned himself on the left flank, accompanied by a group of loyal Sellswords and Dothraki who had come to trust him. Dust rose as hooves pounded the ground. Arrows arced overhead both from Vale archers and from the few Dothraki bowmen. Tyrion's horse snorted nervously, and he had to grip the reins tightly to keep from being swept away in the chaos. The two forces collided in a cacophony of screams and metal. The Dothraki hammered the Vale lines, weaving in and out with savage fluidity. The Vale infantry braced behind shields, spears thrusting. Knightly banners fluttered as cavalry tried to countercharge. Tyrion glimpsed the swirl of steel, the flash of bright surcoats, the streak of blood. A dozen men fell around him. He fought to stay on his mount, a short sword in his hand. He slashed at an incoming foe, more a reflex than any real swordsmanship. The man toppled, run through by a Dothraki blade from behind. Roars of war filled the air. Tyrion guided his horse among the swirling riders, shouting commands to regroup or flank. He saw pockets of Vale men forming shield walls and attempt to hold back the Dothraki tide. Motho led the main charge in the center, his bells ringing like thunder. The savage warlords crashed through lines of lesser spearmen, cutting them down relentlessly. Another wave of knights galloped forward to challenge them, but the Dothraki parted, flanked, and struck. The knights fell in heaps of twisted metal and flesh. Despite the chaos, the Vale troops showed discipline, and the Dothraki found themselves stymied in places. Tyrion circled around, searching for the Vale's leadership. If he could capture or kill them, the lines would collapse. He spied a high banner depicting a bronze crown, House Royce, presumably near the center. Tyrion steered his horse that way, skirting the edges of the melee. Sellswords followed him, hacking at any foe who strayed too close. Suddenly, a group of mounted Vale knights appeared, bearing down on Tyrion's flank. He cursed. The Dothraki had surged elsewhere, leaving this pocket exposed. "Form up!" Tyrion shouted. He could feel the thunder of hooves as the knights lowered lances. The Sellswords hesitated, uncertain. Tyrion ground his teeth and spurred his horse away, hoping to circle around a large boulder and perhaps avoid the brunt of the charge. Lances whistled by. One struck a Sellsword, impaling him. The man's scream rang in Tyrion's ears. He whipped around the boulder, heart pounding. The knights followed, and Tyrion found himself face to face with a young knight, visor lifted, eyes full of hate. "Tyrion Lannister," the knight shouted. "Traitor." He swung his sword. Tyrion barely managed to block with his own blade, the impact numbing his arm. His horse whinnied, nearly throwing him. Panic flared. He was no great warrior. If this knight pressed the attack, Tyrion would be done for. But a savage cry rang out, and a Dothraki rider careened into the knight, knocking him from his horse. The knight's sword clattered away. The Dothraki pinned him down, and a rack raised. Tyrion grimaced, about to tell the rider to take the man prisoner, but he was too slow. The Arak descended, splitting the knight's helmet in a spray of blood. Tyrion swore under his breath. So be it. He swallowed down the surge of fear and revulsion. Focus on surviving, he told himself. Survive and see this through. Within the hour, the Vale lines began to buckle. Motho's relentless assault in the center shattered one division. On the flanks, smaller clusters of defenders found themselves encircled. Eventually, the entire formation collapsed. Men fled, dropping shields and spears. The Dothraki whooped in triumph, chasing down any who ran. The plain was littered with corpses, the trampled ground red with blood. Tyrion reined in his horse, panting, watching the rout unfold. Another victory. Another realm battered into submission. Amid the swirling dust and gore, Tyrion spotted a small cluster of Vale knights still fighting, covering a retreat. Their standard was a dire wolf, albeit crudely painted. Could it be Sansa's personal guard? Tyrion urged his horse forward, curiosity overcoming caution. The cluster of knights turned to engage a group of Dothraki. Tyrion glimpsed a lithe figure among them, clad in partial armor, a cloak of dark fabric trailing behind. Fiery hair spilled out of a metal helm. His heart lurched. Sansa! She was here, in the midst of the slaughter. She drove her sword through a Dothraki's chest, fury in her movements. She'd never been a warrior. Where had she learned such skill? Perhaps desperation gave her strength. Another rider closed on her, but her knights intercepted him. Tyrion watched her for a moment longer, hesitating. If she died here, that would be the end of that. But if she survived, perhaps there was a chance, some fleeting chance of negotiation. Maybe it was a fool's hope. Tyrion turned to his nearest Sellsword, a man named Karsten. Capture her, alive, Tyrion ordered. I want her alive. Karsten nodded, beckoning a few men to follow. They spurred their horses across the field toward Sansa's group. The lady saw them coming, yelled for her knights to brace. but they were too few exhausted. Karsten's men outflanked them, knocked one knight from his horse, and pressed in on Sansa. She fought with surprising ferocity, blocking a blow, slashing at another man's leg. Still, the weight of numbers took its toll. One cell's word disarmed her, another struck her helm, dazing her. The knights tried to protect her, only to be cut down. Tyrion approached as Karsten twisted Sansa's arm behind her back, forcing her to her knees. She panted, helmet askew, hair matted with sweat. When Tyrion dismounted, she looked up, dazed and furious. Recognition sparked in her eyes, swiftly followed by revulsion. "You?" she hissed, blood trickling from a cut on her brow. "Tyrion Lannister, how dare you?" He knelt beside her, ignoring the swirl of battle around them. "Lady Sansa," he said quietly, "I'm sorry it has come to this." Her eyes blazed. He could see hatred, betrayal, and fear all mingled in her gaze. "I want to talk if you'll let me," he said. "But first, put down your arms. Let your men surrender. There's no sense in more dying for nothing." She spat at him, tears brimming in her eyes. "Murderer, you've brought these savages." Her voice choked with despair. "My home. You're destroying everything." Tyrion's voice was soft. "I have my reasons. The realm turned its back on me long ago. He paused, shaking his head. How could he explain? "Enough. My men will take you to safety. I promise you won't be harmed. But if you resist, the Khalasar will show no mercy. Please, Sansa." She glared, trembling. Slowly, she bowed her head, exhausted. The last of her knights lay dead or dying around them. The battlefield was lost. She had no choice. Tyrion rose and signaled Karsten to guard her carefully. He looked upon the horizon, where the dust of retreating Vale soldiers drifted in the wind. Another great house had been broken. The path to King's Landing lay open. In the ensuing days, the Dothraki consolidated their victory. The Vale had been shattered, the Eyrie isolated. Lady Sansa Stark was Tyrion's prisoner, kept under guarded watch in a commandeered fortress. And with that, the gates to the heart of Westeros stood exposed. Tyrion went through the motions of commanding the war effort, dispatching scouts to the Riverlands, forging new alliances with frightened lords who bent the knee rather than face the horde. Still, a heaviness gripped him. At night, he would lie awake, thinking of the blood he'd spilled, the old allegiances he'd shattered, and the faces of those who had once scorned him. The ghosts of Tywin, Cersei, Joffrey, Shae. They all danced through his dreams, mocking or pleading. He poured more wine, desperate to drown them out, but the nightmares always returned. Sansa refused to speak with him at first. She rebuffed him when he visited her chamber, an austere room in the newly claimed fortress. Eventually, after days of silent stares and tense negotiations through a door, she agreed to meet with him in the Solar. He found her seated in a chair by the window, hands folded in her lap. She wore a plain gray dress, her hair pinned up, eyes rimmed with weariness. A bruise marred her temple, the aftermath of the battle. She looked thinner, older, far removed from the sweet young girl he had once known in King's Landing. "You wanted to talk, my lord?" she said curtly. "Here I am. Speak your piece and be gone." Tyrion clasped his hands behind his back. "I'm sorry," he said quietly, "for all of it. I don't expect you to believe that, but I am." She looked at him, her gaze flickering with anger. "You bring an army of savages into the Vale, you slaughter my people, you take me prisoner, yet you say you're sorry?" He sighed, rubbing his temple. "I had little choice. Or, if I did, it was a choice between destruction and my own survival. The realm cast me out, Sansa. I was condemned for murders I didn't commit and hounded across the sea. But I learned how to wield power from the shadows, how to make the world fear me. And now I return to claim what was denied." She let out a harsh laugh. "A crown? You want the Iron Throne? You'll kill as many as it takes to get it." He shrugged, the old bitterness welling up. "I want control. Yes, perhaps the throne. Or perhaps just to unseat those who have wronged me. My father never believed in me. My sister wanted me dead. The realm looked upon me as a monster. So I shall be their monster. But I do not relish the bloodshed." She stared at him in disbelief. "Then stop it." "I can't," he muttered. "Not if I want to maintain control." The Dothraki do not respect cowardice. If I show weakness, they'll turn on me. I need to direct their fury outward toward my enemies. Sansa's eyes flashed. So you'll sacrifice innocent lives for your revenge. You're no better than Cersei or Joffrey. Tyrion's lips tightened. He had no good answer to that. I'm trying, he said at length, to do this in a way that spares some. That's why you're here, alive. I want to negotiate. The Vale is effectively under my control, but the Eyrie remains. If you can persuade them to yield, I promise to spare your people further devastation. She looked at him, tears forming. You think they'll listen to me? After you've slaughtered half their armies? You've doomed them. The Eyrie will fight to the last to avenge their dead. And if we do yield, your riders will just move on to butcher the next region, won't they? Tyrion's silence was telling. I wish to unify Westeros under my rule, he said. Then I can bring an end to the petty wars. The Dothraki will fear me too much to defy me. In time, a new peace could emerge. She shook her head, disgusted. You're delusional. They fell silent. Outside, the sun slipped beyond the parapets. Tyrion could hear the braying of horses and the distant chatter of men. War was at the gates, and it would not be denied. At length, Sansa stood. I won't help you destroy my home, she said. I won't beg. I won't yield. If you have any shred of decency left, release me and let me gather the survivors. Tyrion regarded her, a sorrowful pang in his chest. She had grown strong, resolved. He admired that. And it also meant she was an obstacle. Finally, he said, I cannot let you go. Not yet, but I won't harm you. You have my word. She gave him a withering look, then turned her back. He left the chamber, feeling hollow. Outside, Motho awaited him, impatient about the next conquest. More battles beckoned across the Riverlands, the Crownlands, and eventually King's Landing. There was no turning aside from the path he'd chosen. From the Vale, Tyrion marched his Dothraki south, pressing into the Riverlands. The realm was no stranger to war. The scars left by the War of the Five Kings were still fresh. Houses like the Freys and the Tullus might attempt resistance, but they were weakened by infighting and the ravages of the past. The Dothraki tore across the region, capturing key holdfasts. Gold poured into Tyrion's coffers, fueling the mercenaries who augmented his savage host. Riverrun stood as a bastion of Tully pride, but it was poorly manned after recent upheavals. When the Dothraki arrived, the defenders attempted to hold them at bay, but the fortress was starved of supplies. Tyrion orchestrated a siege, employing cunning sabotage of the gates at night. Within days, the Tully garrison capitulated. Edmure Tully, half broken by years of captivity and shifting alliances, had no stomach left for battle. Tyrion offered terms, sparing the castle in exchange for Edmure's fealty. The lord collapsed into tears, a hollow shell of the man he once was. Another house conquered. In quick succession, the Dothraki claimed Harrenhal, though it was more ruin than a fortress, and smaller settlements along the Trident. The chaos Tyrion sowed prevented any large force from uniting against him. By the time King's Landing realized the scale of the threat, Tyrion was at the doorstep of the Crownlands with tens of thousands of horse lords at his command. Smoke from the pillaged fields wafted across the horizon. Refugees fled, telling tales of a dwarf leading demon cavalry. Fear crept into every corner of the realm. And so, inevitably, Tyrion found himself gazing upon the walls of King's Landing once more. The city of his birth, the city where he had been Hand of the King, where he had been humiliated, tried, condemned. He remembered every crooked alley, every hidden passage. A swirl of conflicting emotions rose within him. On the ramparts, the royal banners fluttered, Lannister crimson and gold. If he wasn't mistaken, though who truly ruled the city was uncertain. Reports suggested that Tommen was dead, that Cersei reigned in madness, or that some new puppet monarch wore the crown. Tyrion did not particularly care. His personal vendettas had led him here, and ironically, he was about to tear down the city he once tried to defend against Stannis Baratheon's siege. This time, the invaders were more savage by far. The Dothraki, enthralled by the sight of massive walls, readied themselves for another rampage. Tyrion let them see how grand the city was, teeming with dwellings and illusions of splendor. But he cautioned that a direct assault would cost many lives. They needed a plan. In secret, Tyrion reached out to contacts within the city, old smugglers, discontented merchants, any who might slip him intelligence. He discovered that the city watch was poorly paid and disloyal, that the Lannister forces were stretched thin, and that a widespread hunger gripped the capital. Perfect conditions for a swift overthrow. Under cover of darkness, Tyrion organized infiltration. Gates were opened, bribes were paid, and once a few hundred Dothraki slipped inside, the city watch collapsed quickly. Chaos erupted in the streets as more gates swung wide and the horde poured in. Residents fled, many trying to reach the Red Keep for safety. But the Red Keep itself, seat of the Iron Throne, was not impregnable. The Dothraki swarmed up the hills, unstoppable. The gold cloaks that remained either surrendered or died where they stood. The Great September of Baelor, still scarred from past conflicts, offered no sanctuary from the tide of terror. Tyrion entered the city through the mud gate, leading a column of sellswords. He saw frightened commoners huddled in alleyways, mothers clutching children. He waved them aside, urging the Dothraki to pass without spilling unnecessary blood. Some listened, others took to looting. The city's wealth, meager as it might be now, was easy pickings. Flames started in various districts, a product of wanton destruction. Tyrion knew the city could burn if he let the Dothraki run wild. So he used every scrap of authority to contain the chaos. If he wanted to rule, he needed a city that still stood. At times, he found himself physically interposing between the Dothraki and innocent civilians, shouting for them to stand down in their own tongue. Some spat in anger, but Motho had declared Tyrion must be obeyed if the conquest was to succeed. At last, Tyrion and a retinue of warriors approached the Red Keep's gates. The old fortress rose above them, the seat of Targaryen kings, Baratheon kings, and now Lannister kings. The gates were barred, but it did not matter. Betrayal from within opened them soon enough. Tyrion strode into the courtyard, heart-hammering, seeing the grand steps that led to the throne room. That hall contained so many bitter memories. The day he had demanded trial by combat, the day he had been found guilty of Joffrey's murder, the day he had shot his father. Now he came to claim it in the name of the Dothraki. A final pocket of resistance formed inside the throne room. A handful of Kingsguard knights, battered but proud, arrayed around the dais. Upon the Iron Throne sat a figure in Lannister garb. As Tyrion entered, flanked by savage warriors, the figure rose. Cersei. She looked haggard, hair cropped short, as wild with fury. She wore a red gown and ornate crown on her brow. The knights at her side drew their swords, prepared to defend the queen to the death. Tyrion halted at the threshold. Memories crashed over him like a tidal wave. He saw the scorn in Cersei's eyes, the cruelty on her lips. She had sought his demise more times than he could count. She had turned the realm against him. And yet she was his sister. How dare you? She snarled. You worthless imp, you come here with barbarians. He cut her off. Enough. It's over, Cersei. He gestured to the Dothraki who filled the room, aurochs gleaming. Outside, King's Landing smoldered. Yield. Her laughter was laced with madness. Yield? To you? I'd sooner burn this city to ash. Tyrion's voice turned cold. You tried that once. Didn't work out. Now I am in command. She spat at the floor. The Kingsguard tensed. Tyrion gestured, and half a dozen Dothraki stepped forward, brandishing aurochs. The white-cloaked knights stood no chance. Cersei realized it. Still, she wore defiance like a shield. I am the queen of the Seven Kingdoms. You are queen of naught, Tyrion replied. Take her. He aimed the command at his men, who sprang into motion. The Kingsguard surged forward, valiantly attempting to hold them back. A brief skirmish ensued. Tyrion watched as the aurochs clashed with longswords. One white cloak fell, then another. Blood splattered the marble floor. Finally, a Dothraki warrior disarmed the last knight, driving a knee into his gut and throwing him to the ground. Cersei stood alone, trembling with rage. Tyrion advanced upon her. She clawed at him, cursing his name, but he caught her wrists, pinned them. She glared up at him, madness dancing in her eyes. You are truly Tywin's son, she hissed. Cruelty and cunning, that's all you know. Now you bring this doom upon us. Tyrion felt an odd numbness. Take her away, he commanded again. The men dragged her off, still spitting venom. She would be locked in a cell, maybe tried for her crimes. Or perhaps he would let the Dothraki decide her fate. Tyrion found he had little appetite for revenge now that she was in his power. She was a broken shell of the proud queen she once was. That was punishment enough. He ascended the dais, staring at the Iron Throne. A twisted mass of swords fused by dragonfire long ago. Once he could never have imagined himself here. A dwarfed outcast, unworthy in the eyes of lords and ladies. Now the entire city cowered before him, and the Dothraki horde answered to him, so long as he fed their lust for war. He placed a hand on the arm of the throne, feeling the cold metal. In the flickering torchlight, it shimmered like a dragon's hide. The hall was silent except for the panting of the men, the crackle of distant flames. Motho strode up beside him, bells jingling. The Khal gazed at the throne with no particular awe. You sit, Motho said in broken common tongue, you king now. Tyrion let out a breath. Yes, he said. I am. He turned, sat upon the throne with cautious grace, feeling the weight of it beneath him. The throne felt as cold and jagged as the realm he now dominated. Dothraki warchiefs ring the hall, and Sel's words bowed, their loyalty bought. A wave of conflicting emotions crashed through him, triumph, horror, sadness, relief. He had done it, carved a path of blood and fire to claim the seat of kings. And yet he felt no exultation. He looked out over the monstrous seat of power, over the shattered defenders. He saw the shadow of what his father once desired. How Tywin would have laughed or raged at the idea of Tyrion, the malformed son, sitting the Iron Throne. And what now? He had to keep the Dothraki in check, hold the realm, stave off rebellions, and keep the savage tide from devouring everything. The war was not over. Dawn would bring fresh challenges. Already, pockets of resistance might be forming in the Reach, in the north, or along the coasts. Winter loomed, and with it unimaginable hardships. The cost of holding this throne would be incalculable. Yet, as he gazed at the scorched banners, the battered columns of the throne room, Tyrion Lannister, once called the Imp, allowed himself a moment of quiet reflection. Everything had led him here: betrayal, exile, cunning deals, the unleashing of a savage army upon his homeland. He was a king of ashes, perched on a seat of swords, and the realm bled at his feet. There would be no songs of glory, no praise for a dwarf savior. Only fear, hatred, and the stench of death. He closed his eyes, took a deep, shuddering breath. The ghosts would come for him, but for now he was the one who had won. A Lannister always paid his debts, and Tyrion had settled his in fire and steel. Whether history would curse him or remember him as something more, he did not know. All he knew was that he, Tyrion of House Lannister, had at last seized the power so long denied to him, and in the process he had cast Westeros into a storm that might never fully abate. He opened his eyes, raised his head, and gave the order for a new dawn. If there was any redemption to be found in his conquest, it would depend on how he wielded this brittle scepter. The Dothraki were unleashed, and so was he. Whatever future the Seven Kingdoms had left, it would be written in the blood and cunning that had forged this moment. Tyrion Lannister sat on the Iron Throne, the dwarf king of a sundered realm, and the echoes of hoofbeats still thundered across the land, heralding the savage new age he had brought upon them all.